Hi again, everybody. Here's a neat little game that was played in Moscow in 1929 with Lukomsky with the white pieces and Potobin with the black, and it's a Queen's Indian defense. And it starts out d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, b6, e4. Now black brings the bishop down to b4. Now white hits at the knight at f6 by playing the pawn up to e5. So black moves the knight to e4, hitting at the c3 knight again. But instead of defending the knight, white plays the queen out to g4. So black goes ahead and takes the knight at c3 with his own knight. And after white recaptures the knight with the b-pawn, black plays bishop takes c3 check. White moves the king to d1. But at this point, black does not take the rook at a1. And if you'll bear with me for a minute here, I'll show you why. Because if he does take the rook at a1, white will then play queen takes g7, hitting at black's rook. So after the rook will move to f8, white would then play the bishop to g5, hitting at the queen. And the only thing black can do would be to block with the pawn at f6, but then white would just go ahead and take the pawn with the bishop, still hitting at the queen. And then after the rook would have to take the bishop, white would of course then just take the rook with his e-pawn, and now white is threatening to play queen takes queen to g8, checkmate. And all black could really do would be to get an escape square for his king, and he would have to just play his d-pawn up, say to d5, and then white would simply play the f-pawn up to f7 with check. And after the king moved to probably d7, then all white has to do is just promote the pawn at f8 to a queen and give a discovered check with his other queen at the same time. And of course after the king would move away to c6 or wherever, white would simply take black's queen, and the game is essentially over. So like I said, black decides not to take the rook at a1, but he still needs to defend the g-pawn from the queen. But instead of, he decides not to castle, because if he castles like that, white would play bishop to h6, threatening checkmate at g7, and the only way to stop that would be to play the g-pawn forward. And then white, of course, would simply take the rook at f8, and then black could take the rook finally at a1, but then of course white could then just retreat the bishop back to h6, and material is, well, there's only a pawn ahead for black. So after all of that explanation, black just decides to defend the g-pawn by moving the king over to f8. And now that gives white time to move the rook over from a1 to b1. Now black brings up the knight to c6, and now white gets in a very quick check by playing the bishop to a3. And black cannot just block this check, incidentally, just by playing the d-pawn up to d6, because if he does, white would then just simply play the queen to f3, which hits at both black's bishop at c3, but also his knight at c6, and he can't save both of them. He'd have to lose a piece. So after the check from the bishop at a3, black just moves the king over to g8. And now white brings up his rook to b3, hitting at the bishop, but black just simply takes the pawn at d4 since he's attacking it twice with the bishop and the knight, and it's only defended once by white's queen. So like I said, black just takes bishop takes g4. And that finally brings us to the challenge to the viewer. If you'd like to pause the video now and see if you can find white's next move, I'll wait for you. White plays queen takes g7, check. And of course black has no choice, he must capture the queen. And now white swings the rook over to g8, or g3, excuse me, check. And black again only has one move, and that is king to h6. Well, he did have another move, I should say. He could have blocked with the queen, but obviously he didn't want to give up the queen, so king to h6. Now white plays bishop to c1, check. And black moves the king to h5. White now plays the other bishop up to e2, check. And now black's only move is the king to h4. And white ends the game with rook to h3. Checkmate. A nice little forced march there. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the game, and I'll see you next time.